One of the questions is were you ever concerned that all this research would yield that it doesn't matter, that character doesn't matter, and how did you manage yourself through that, and then tell us about the time when when you added it all up and you got the results. What was that like?
I'm a data wonk. I love data, so I was constantly just curious. And luckily, we had an advisory board made up of a couple of professors of accounting from Duke University. So they were there to give me moral support, but they they're scientists also. It was an open question for them too. Once we got up to a respectable sample, we got, I think, had complete data sets on a little over 40 CEOs. We ran the numbers, and holy cow, we were just amazed that the high character CEOs and their senior teams were bringing in almost 4 times more to the bottom line than those of those
Wow.
CEOs and senior teams who were rated low. We sent that data to the Duke University professors and said, Shane, look at this. I must be missing something. What am I smoking? Because these results look pretty good. And he got back and he said, no, your analysis is fine and the results are there, they're accurate. But he said, your sample's small. He said, you need to get more. So this was about 3 years into the study. So I took a big sigh and said, okay, keep plugging along. And once we got up to 85 or 84 data sets, we ran the numbers again and they were even stronger than they were at 44. It was almost 5 times more to the bottom line. So it held
Wow.
up. And then we did a really in-depth analysis. We looked, are there other factors that could be accounting for this? Like maybe it's at that time there was a lot of sort of discussion around the importance of religion, and religious leaders were thought to be more honest and better business people than those that weren't religious. And well, we had gathered data about that, about people's religious practices. So we were able to sort these 84 into two groups, those 10 or 11 CEOs who had weekly consistent religious practices in their lives versus those at the other end of the scale who never had entered a place of worship in their entire life. And then we looked at their financial results, no differences. So we sorted then based on political preferences, because we'd asked each of those CEOs to identify who they had voted for in the past in all of the presidential elections since they had been able to vote. So we were able to identify, I think, 11 hardcore Republicans that had voted Republican at every election, and 12 Democrats, the other end, who had voted nothing but Democrats. And we looked at their financial results. No differences.
Wow.
We looked at other factors like childhood, happy homes versus those who are unhappy homes, and looked sorted them. There were no differences there. Of course, we sorted by education. The MBAs and the PhDs didn't get any better results than the high school dropouts. So we couldn't find any explanation in all that data that we collected, or we sorted by at the extremes of that data and looked at financial results. It was always nothing until you sort by character, by how the employees viewed these people as treating them. Do they tell us the truth? Do they keep their promises? Do they care for us as people? Do they treat us well when we make mistakes, not shame us, blame us? For those that were rated very high on those versus those that were rated very low, there was this huge impact on productivity and on profitability, 5 times more. And of course, a big bump difference in workforce engagement and actually a lower risk profile, fewer lawsuits, and that sort of thing. So that was the data. So the thing that I regret is that I never kept the name and the number of the reviewer that called me. So, because 7 years later, I would have given him a call, but I couldn't remember who it was. So,
Well, he certainly deserves some credit, and you deserve some credit for listening and being humble about it and trying to figure out how to answer the question he asked. Jess, turning it over to you. Do you have any questions on your side?
Before I ask my couple of questions, I just want to confirm that I'm reading table B4 in the book correctly, because the way I read it, Fred, it looks like if you add up across all these different company sizes, that the total return on assets across these different organizations, different industries, they were doing kind of like 5.2% return on assets total, but that the self-focused CEOs were doing about 1.9%, and that the virtuoso
Mhm.
CEOs, these ones with the high moral habits, the character, that they were doing 9.3% return on assets. Am I reading that correctly?
Right. Yep.
To me,
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
incredible, especially when you go from companies at sub 500 employees over to the like 10,000 plus employee range, and then it
Yeah.
shows up in these
Right.
different areas. And um, I guess for me, it's fun to actually see the data. You talk about being a data wonk. Like, everybody has opinions,
Yeah.
right? It's just so much easier to
Right.
share them with some empirical evidence and a reasonable sample size to back it up.
Well, right. I'm a person that I don't particularly like debate or conflict, and I thought I'd better write this book, but I'm going to put all the data in there because if you don't like what I've had to say in the book, well, do your own analysis. Here's the
Yeah.
data.
Well, I wish I could remember who said this, but I love the quote. They said, "In God we trust; all else bring data." So, um,
Yes, I love that.
okay. So I think my first question is: there's a term that you've said today that shows up a few places in the book, and I'd love to know how you define it or how you think about it. You talk about seeing people as people, not as objects. Can you talk about what that means to you or how you define that?
Well, sure. I mean, it's what high character people do because high character people have their heads and their hearts connected. They're not just head people. Head people fail to see the whole human being, and they themselves typically are not very integrated as human beings. And unfortunately, that's a big part of Western culture. Is masculinity is very much a head kind of posture to have, and it's even our culture we think of women as being on the heart side, and they're the soft things like compassion and forgiveness and all that. And men, they're the hard driving, they're the ones that tell the truth and integrity and responsibility and owning up and all of that sort of thing. Well, the real integrated human being embraces both of those sides. When you have only half of it, you only have a half a human being. And unfortunately, that's what's really defined capitalism for us. Capitalism itself as a system is amoral. It doesn't have any moral um, sides to it. It's who practices capitalism that brings the morality to it. And unfortunately, our capitalism has been promoted mostly by a male-dominated way of thinking, which does, well, in fact, it was Milton Friedman who said the only purpose of business is to make profit for the shareholders. Well, that is a pretty narrow view of what the purpose of business is. And if business it doesn't exist to help better make the world a better place, it's not going to exist in a few years. I mean, we got huge problems in society that we need to face. And it takes the whole human being to do that. So